Okay, so the video that I sent you was pretty good actually. So all we really want to do is kind of go over quickly what you're going to see differently in your system versus the system that he was operating in, just to maybe cover up any loose ends. Your problem isn't a new problem. It's a very common problem. What's happening is a small amount of water is leaking by the valve, and it's by the force of gravity draining to the lowest point in the zone, and that so happens to be the head that's closest to the sidewalk in the driveway. So it's surfacing at that point. So a lot of people think it's the head that's leaking, but it's not. It's actually the valve that's seeping by a very small amount of water. Okay, and that's because the valve isn't able to close properly. So what we got to do is we got to first figure out which valve it is that's giving you a problem. If you go to your valve box, you're going to see multiple valves. 4, I think. Every system is a little bit different. And if I were to guess, it's probably going to be the valve that's closest to the sprinkler, but don't hold me to it. So the first thing we got to do is we got to figure out which valve it is that's giving you a problem. On the top of the valve, you're going to see, oh, good. Here, okay, you're going to see a bleed screw. Okay, and in that bleed screw, if you loosen it, what that does is it releases the pressure on the valve and actually opens it. And sprinklers will come on. If it's the sprinklers that are seemingly leaking, then you know that's the valve that has to be fixed. If it turns on sprinklers somewhere else in the landscape, great, you know that valve doesn't have to be fixed. So you can just take the bleed screw and, just tighten that back up. Not like super tight, just finger tight, and you'll be good to go. And in a few seconds, it'll rebuild the pressure to actually turn off the valve again. Okay, so if you got 4 valves in your valve box, just repeat the process until you find the valve that's giving you an issue. Once you figure out which valve that's giving you an issue, go turn off the water. I don't even think the other guy said that. It's pretty important. If you don't do that before we start taking apart the valve, you'll be up to your elbows in water in no time, and we all know how much you like surprises. So you've turned off the water, so now we're going to take apart the valve. He says disconnect the field wires. Probably a good idea, but it's not usually a step that I go through. If you just make sure that the wires don't get tangled up and so tight that they actually rip off the top of the solenoid, you'll be good to go to just actually unscrew the solenoid. Remember, lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. So just make sure that you drape the solenoid over the side of the valve box, but don't put the solenoid in any dirt or rock or get any junk on the bottom of that solenoid, because that'll give you an issue later. Okay, so you got your valve. The difference between this valve and the valve in the video is it's still a Rainbird DV100 1-inch valve. The difference is that this is a jar top and the one in the video isn't. Hence why you don't see any screws. So to take off the top of the valve, you simply unscrew it like you would any jam jar. And in there, you're going to find something very similar to what he found. You'll find a spring attached to a diaphragm. And what you want to do is you want to take that diaphragm off the body of the valve. And to do that, you just kind of pry it off. You know, like you don't want to use a knife or a screwdriver or anything like that, because if you rip the solenoid or cut it in any way, the whole thing is useless and it won't work. So you got to be kind of careful with that. Again, you're looking inside the valve to make sure that there isn't any debris or anything like that. Often we'll find a rock, dirt, or even a pine needle that's giving you an issue. You won't find any rusted galvanized metal in your pipes because you don't have any. So that's not what you're going to find. If you can fish it out with your fingers, great. If you want to try needle nose pliers, you can do that too. If worse comes to worse, you can actually go back to your water shut off, turn it on quickly, full blast, and then turn it off in brief spurts, and that'll actually flush out the valve. And you can let water pressure do that annoying task of fishing out the debris. Okay, so now you've looked inside. Again, you don't see any debris or anything that might be giving you an issue, so you can actually put it all back together, slap the diaphragm back in there, center the diaphragm and the spring in the middle of the jar top. And just make sure that that's tight. Okay. Take your solenoid. Can't do the mirror image. Okay. And just screw that back on. If you over tighten the solenoid, you'll actually pinch this green O-ring in here. And so if you actually over tighten it, you'll actually create another leak. So just be careful with that when you're screwing it back on. Make sure it's square and tight, but not too tight. Make sure your lead screw is tight. Make sure your solenoid is tight. Your field wires should still be connected if you did it my way. If you didn't, reconnect your field wires. And then you go to your water shutoff, and you actually turn the water back on slowly so not to create a water hammer, and eventually the water will come to a stop. And time for the sound effects. If you hear a sound, you might still have a valve that's still seeping by. Sometimes it's very faint, so you can actually put your ear up to the valve, or put a flathead screwdriver to the top of the valve body and put the handle up against your eardrum, and you can sometimes hear a tss sound or a hissing sound. If you do hear that, you might still have a valve that's hissing by. Other than that, you got to visually inspect everything. When you take apart a valve and you're not careful, I was mentioning that O-ring before, it'll be leaking right here. And you want to make sure that it's not leaking underneath the jar top. You might be saying to me, well, Dan, I just, flushed it out. How am I going to tell if there's a leak with all the water inside the valve box? I don't have a good answer to that, so you might have to go grab a towel and dry it off or something like that. Okay, so if you don't hear hissing noise, you don't see any leaks here, you don't see any of this, then you're probably good to go. Honestly, it's really that quick, that easy. And you might just want to go and do an electrical test to make sure that it's still working electrically. And that shouldn't be a problem. You might say to me, well, it was just a little bit of water. How can I tell if it's not still seeping by at the head? You're just going to have to monitor it, I guess. If you don't see a hissing noise or anything like that, or you don't see your water meter turning, that's another way to tell. Then just see if the water dries up off the cement in a couple hours. And if it does, great. And if it doesn't, then we got a bigger issue. And it can be a whole myriad of different things. So let's start with this, because this is what it is most often. And if that fixes the problem, great. And if it doesn't, we'll look at our options. Good luck, man. Talk to you soon.